also an expert on UFOs. He was a member of the MUFON project that the Air Force sponsored back in the 60s, and excuse me. And he came here today to talk to you about not only Project Blue Book, but his many years experience in working with the UFO community. And so I'd like to give you now Mr. Bill Hicks.
I'm privileged to be anywhere, so especially your folks. But let me, barring the thoughts of Ezekiel's wheel within a wheel going back through the biblical times and even more recent times and some, let me tell you how I got interested in the subject matter. Being in the Army Air Corps in World War II, we never saw anything. Flights and whatever around it. Other than the over France and England, there were the Foo Fighters that you might have heard about, but nobody really knew what they were or didn't say. Our government used to think that these were light sources, almost like a bubble, larger than a small bubble, like a larger balloon, but not like a balloon either. Anyway, about the size like that would tend to follow our bombers and fighter planes over Europe and return, and even the Nazis reported, Germany reported the same thing, their pilots did. We thought it was some kind of something that they had come up with, and vice versa, but we never did find out what they were. But in any event, in 1947, a man from Idaho was flying his private plane to Mount Rainier, Washington area. And en route, he noticed, came to his attention by the sun reflecting off of whatever it was he thought he saw, 9 silvery objects. And they seemed to be floating around over Mount Rainier and the mountain peaks over and so on. And he was able to observe those until he flew into his destination. He was talking with over his intercom radio to his destination, and evidently a newspaper reporter of that area out in around Tacoma, Washington, and also there, heard about it, so he met this fellow, Kenneth Arnold, this pilot's name. And so when the Arnold landed, this reporter was there to greet him and learn a little bit more about what these things were. Not that Arnold knew, nobody knew. But Arnold said it was much like if you were out on a creek bank and you had some saucers, you were just skipping them across the water. Well, he could have said, if any of you have been on the creek banks and all, like I have, my folks, my grandparents, finding little flat rocks and throwing the rocks across, and they skip across. It's that type of a floating action, so to speak, that Ken Arnold reported these items. And he said they went up just like saucers, you call saucers instead of a rock. And so the enterprising, I guess, newspaper reporter referred to them as flying saucers. If he had said rocks, he probably would have called them flying rocks, but flying saucers. And so that was a sort of a title for an unusual object for quite some time. And then many people, including my oldest son, took snapshots of the Polaroid cameras out in the backyard, the garbage can lids, and hubcaps and so on. And so the situation was somewhat abused. Now, people all over, from France, Germany, United States, and so on, started taking pictures of circular objects. And it was very plain that most of them were just hoax-based photos. Somebody wanted to try to get in the act, so to speak. Oh, I saw one, and there were always, most of them were relatively close to the ground, and you could see the handle on top of the garbage can, but, things like that. So anyway, that's the reason I said it had Arnold reported them as flying rocks. That's probably what it is. And then we've seen different kind of rocks in the air, maybe more rocks in our head. But in any event, my then wife and I, and that was in 1947, were in Fort Worth, Dallas area visiting a childhood friend of mine who now lives in Colorado, and they were driving us around the Fort Worth area. It was their cars, 2 lanes, with everybody getting out to see what the other people were looking at, looking up in the sky. And between the buildings, we happened to get out in time to see this Air Force plane, even though it was a cargo type plane, which motor plane, no jets at that point. And we saw it through the buildings, everybody else observed the same thing. Around the fuselage of the plane, picture an airplane flying across. This was going from our right to our left. Between the wings, front wings and the tail wing section, an object which would be later called cigar-shaped object was encircling the plane in flight. It was almost like a tethering action, except other than the tether ball gradually getting closer to the pole, this seemed to maintain an equal distance as it was going around the plane, in between the wings, and leaving a slight exhaust, not an after image or all that, which would dissipate, and we could see then, since we were going from our right to left, where you get to somebody.
Yeah, making Mickey cross back.
And Mickey with the ice in it. Well, thank you anyway. Whoops, I already spilled it. Thank you, sir. But in any event, it maintained what appeared to us an equal distance. So as we observed it, the object, let's say cigar-shaped object, was evidently going around the plane that way, so we could see it going down, around, over, and coming around the fuselage the entire time, just until the tall buildings, we couldn't see it any further because of the buildings. Everybody got in the cars and that. Nobody really said anything about it. Just amazed, amused, and wondering what it was, because I'd never seen anything like that in the Air Force anyway, or Air Corps. I got in the Air Force Reserves. Became Air Force in '47, and I was in Air Force Reserves for about 6 years, which doesn't mean anything except to help me get. I'll get into here shortly. But in any event, in the Fort Worth Times Record, or Star Telegram, it's called Fort Worth, it's Fort Smith Times Record, and Fort Worth is Star Telegram. In the paper the next morning, on about the 4th page, was an article about the newspaper reporters had interviewed the pilot and the crew of that plane about this alleged object. And they said they hadn't seen anything to them unusual. So, and most airplanes then, and some may now, don't have rear view mirrors like we have on the car. They're looking ahead and to one side to be sure they're not going to be ramming, flying into another airplane. And to the other, because of the other things they could work that out lifetime around. But anyway, they said they hadn't seen anything unusual. So I assumed, and maybe others did too, from the newspaper article, that was something they knew what it was, but it looked different from us, on the ground. It couldn't have looked much different because we saw it as it was encircling the plane in flight. And in any event, that was not a saucer-shaped object. That was what was later referred to by others who apparently and allegedly have seen a similar object as a cigar-shaped object. So that kind of got my attention, wondering what it was, since the newspaper article didn't tell us. And shortly after that, a fellow named Donald Kehoe was mentioned in the papers about going into Texas to check on some sightings. And these were allegedly saucer-shaped objects. So then it went from whatever to flying saucers, and which didn't, which I've already mentioned, but that didn't cover all the things like the cigar-shaped object, saucers, and whatever, triangular, or whatever it may be, and more especially now. So then the terminology was changed to UFOs, unidentified flying objects. It was later, when I found out about National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, then I really found out about Project Blue Book, which was later over 2 other projects before that, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Project Sign, whatever that would have meant, the sign of things to come, it means different things to different people. It was later changed to Project Grudge, not that everybody's mad at each other or anything, but maybe thought, I guess the thought was at that time, Wright-Patterson, was that if we change the name to something like that, it may discourage people, from reporting these silly things. And a lot of silly things were reported, by the way. And then eventually we changed to Project Blue Book, which operated for a number of years, closed in 1969, I believe. But I had gotten interested in the subject because of what we saw over Fort Worth, Texas. The then director of Project Blue Book, I had sent a message into something about that into Wright-Patterson for one of the original earlier projects, and I got a phone call from him. Evidently, there weren't a lot of organizations, there weren't a lot of people out reporting at the time, like we're trying to do here today, which is a good thing. He called me and asked if he was for years. Never actually met him, but talked to him on the phone. Anyway, he was in charge of Project Blue Book. And he asked if I would be interested in reporting any other sightings in our area, whatever the area might have been that came to my attention. I told him I'd be happy to, in which I did through the years. And to make a long story a lot shorter, because I don't know how much time they want me to talk about how great I are and that sort of thing, is that I became Dr. J. Allen Hynek, was a professor in Evanston, Illinois, and Dr. Hynek became the scientific advisor to the Air Force on Project Blue Book. How many recognize some of these names? If you've been in it a while, you're well, good. At least some of you will be following me here, maybe. Right up until they put the straitjackets on me.
He was an astronomer.
He was an astronomer. Yes, as a matter of fact, he was the one who put the astronomy, what they call it, station on Hawaii. When we were watching, and others did too. He worked with other scientists and astronomers, and the Japanese coming over the first sight of the plane that thought hours returning. But in the event, I became an investigator for the original Project Blue Book, and then Dr. Hynek at a UFO conference. I need to tell you about that briefly. I'm trying to be as brief as I can about the background because it's insignificant. It doesn't mean a hill of beans other than what I have learned through the years, what I saw, and the people with whom I associated on the subject matter. But again, I can say I started. Well, anyway, at this convention, since Blue Book was closed in 1969, Dr. Hynek said, Bill, what we need is another Project Blue Book. He was already the head of the Center for UFO Studies and worked with all the organizations and the Air Force, the government, like that, and all of them. And so he said, why don't you, or ask another one, why don't you look into it and start a new Project Blue Book? And so I did. I received permission from the Air Force and Wright-Patterson to utilize that name. So I started what was called, still is called, the new Project Blue Book. And at that point in time, I appointed 144 men and women who had been closely associated with the earlier reported sightings. Many of them have passed away. Some of them didn't want to become known to be continuing something that they had gotten out of for years, and sort of thing, until they passed away. Now there are about 23 left of those, including myself, from the original days, and I'm hoping it'll last a little bit longer, and some of them that we were talking earlier, and whatever. But anyway, there was something I needed to tell you. If my wife were here, she would tell me, Billy, we're talking about something. But it had something to do with these organizations. So anyway, before I became the head of the then later Project Blue Book, I was a member of NICAP, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena. I enjoyed that, and I joined an organization called Midwest UFO Network, which is now MUFON, Usual UFO Network. And anyway, I belonged to all of them, voluntarily. personnel. We had, I was really fortunate, I guess, with the background or something, but whatever it was, we had people from the FBI, CIA, NORAD, NASA, the then UFO organizations were represented, and and then people showed up who had heard about it, found out about it, who had been quite well known at the time of having seen things and all that, and who's mentioned periodically in this MUFON journal, going back through the years that we mentioned. Charles, what's his name, down on the coast, he and his buddy with him were allegedly taken aboard. Charles Dixon. He was here, and he consented to come and take a polygraph test until he got here. And Charles was writing a book, and the fellow who was writing it for him suggested, you better not take that test. It's a good thing, because they found some, not that he didn't see it, but they found some discrepancies in the polygraph. So anyway, I've been through all of those things, and I have seen other things in the presence of others that I couldn't explain, and but no telling what they might have been. But it doesn't bother me, because whatever we see or think we see, if they're from other worlds, one of these days we'll know. If they're not, they probably belong to us or one of the other nations as experimental craft or whatever. They're not, to my knowledge, other than those who allegedly have been taken aboard a craft, like Charles Dixon, and others who see animals and all kinds of strange creatures. We have nothing to fear except fear itself. And I really, to be honest with you, I don't believe in anything like that. I accept the possibility, but until it's proven, I'll still be investigating and working with people. I never turn in their names when I work with them. I have tapes, many tapes where I've interviewed people from high places, low places, so to speak, and all. And I promised them I'd never use their names, even to this date, and about some of the reported sightings. There have been some terrific things. But since that first sighting I had in Fort Worth, I've had others, which keeps me going. And like this meeting, it keeps me going because you're fine people. You're probably and evidently interested in the subject because you're here. One of the leaders of the field of yesteryear was a fellow named Dewey Fernay. That's where you already see. That may be a name that's familiar to some of you if you've gone back through the history of it. Here is Dewey's briefcase. We knew each other very well. He came to the UFO conference I had here. Oh, the other thing was I started the one in Jersey Springs. I had it a number of years ago, and I had some of the same military people, and Dewey Fernay was there, and others of like background. And the ones who presented now are fine people, and I find no fault with it at all. But they wanted me to say, we hoped that we had somebody here who had been captured by a gorilla or all this sort of thing. Well, I didn't want to, because I wanted at that point in time to keep some of the original things going and try to get into people who really had seen something that could be plausible, and not that the other couldn't. So I won't try to take away some of your on some of these other matters, really. But, so I had that one up there, and I turned, after that person, I turned it over to the present people who presented. They're doing a great job with it. They're, where we had about 150 or 75, they had like 300 or 400. They probably fill your Eagle Springs. Now, I have an annual convention on another matter up there. In fact, this weekend after this one coming up, that I have in here, which will be the 37th annual convention there. But anyway, I've been very active through the years, very interested through the years, and mainly I've been interested not because of what I think or don't think and what I've seen or think I've seen and so on. The people who were reporting these things, good people like you, and reporting things that are very sides of some of the other main reports that have since been shot down as hoaxes, and by hoaxes by the persons who brought them to the attention of others. One was, and people have gotten mad at me about it, is the Gulf Breeze situation. And I was asked to go down and meet with the mayor and the chief of police of Gulf Breeze. I went down there and they told me more about the background of the person who allegedly seen it, and also told me more about what the sightings had been. And one of the fellows was very adamant about my taking this other stand, talking about all these special lights, portable lights that have been put on the beaches of Gulf Breeze to watch these strange lights. What they were, most of them, I don't know, they may have seen something else, but were the helicopters and the ships at sea looking for people coming in from Cuba and otherwise, and also bringing in drugs and whatever. That's what those were set up for. All of those strong lights that were there. They weren't there to look for flying saucers or anything of that nature. So anyway, I had a good talk with those people. They supported me in it, and I took their viewpoint with the chief of police and the mayor. Certainly, I thought they were good people in the community, not the person reporting it wasn't. Anyway, so the thing I would suggest to you, if you're going out to, or you'll get into this, hopefully, if I ever get through, they want to talk with you about being a reporter, investigator for UFO sightings in your area. I think you will really enjoy it. I would suggest that you go in, if somebody says whether you know them or not, regardless of how fantastic the story may seem, go in, don't tell them. Go in with a viewpoint, well, it's not a hoax, but they just have misidentified a normal thing. Take it, don't tell them that, but get their report and take it from there. You may be switched over to that other side. I'd like for you to be switched to the real side. I mean, what they really saw, if it's none of it. Remember, anything you can identify is unidentified flying object, whether it's an airplane, bird, flight, or whatever it may be. So anyway, you're with, if you don't belong to MUFON, you ought to. It's the only UFO organization that's really still in existence and doing a great job. I know their director, Jim Karen, and he's a fine fellow. And periodically I send certain bits of info, and I try to always send you a copy, so I don't send that much. Because I want you to have a copy of anything I send you. So hang in there. We don't know what these things really are. If we did, we wouldn't have this meeting today. I imagine it's been a great thing for me. If you've been at home enough, if not, you think you've been at home enough, just sit there listening to me. But I'm listed in this book, Who's Who, and Ufology. It came out in